All right. Perhaps we can call this a why-to video as opposed to a how-to video. I'm going to look at a model that I created a while ago here and point out some of the reasons you might enjoy working with our meta-solid modeling system that combines some of the aspects of solid modeling with a completely automated mesh generation feature to give you a kind of flexibility in your work that you don't get through any other method. We're going to concentrate on this area back here, and you can see over there on the right, we already meshed this once, and that's again a completely automated process. And now we've decided we want to make some changes to the model, and I've got a group of objects here. I just used the G key to select that group. It consists of some simple Boolean clusters like the blades of the propeller, and just a lot of simple primitives as well. And all of them have been put into a group, so I can easily select them and move them around. And I'm just using our move constraint here to constrain the movement to the Y and Z plane, and moving that whole engine assembly, if you will, around. Now, again, because we're working with these simple primitives, these solid objects, I'm free to do this. The mesh comes later, so I don't have to worry about the mesh at this point. If I decide that I need to change the balance of this craft, didn't quite like the way things were sitting, even though there was a great deal of complexity and interest in that part of the mesh, none of it required manual labor, so I'm not at all inhibited about going in here and just rearranging things. Now these pipes ended up floating up here in space. I don't really care for that, so I'm going to move them as well independently of the rest of the engine assembly. And I'm going to use a handy feature we have here that allows me to rotate around the axis of any object I touch. And there's a big flat disc or cylinder there in the center of that engine assembly, and I'm going to use that as my reference of rotation simply by clicking on it when I rotate. And now I've set the snap up to 45 degrees. And whoops, that's what you don't want to do there. I forgot to constrain it to Y, which is the axis along the length of any cylinder in our system. So by constraining it to Y, 4 snaps, and there I am back around on the underside of the engine assembly, buried inside of other stuff, but that's okay, because I will then, since those objects are still selected, I will go ahead and change the tool just by using the T key to cycle through tools. You can see the cursor change. I've got the reshape cursor now, and I just scaled everything up. And now I'm going to tweak those some more. And this is, I mean, all of this is, let's not worry too much about keystrokes and all that. What I'm really trying to get to here is that as I'm making these little changes that you see, if this were a mesh, none of this would be possible. But because they are, the solid geometry in the mesh comes later, I'm free to explore and tweak and refine this assembly and this shape as much as I want. And I decide I want to increase the radius a bit, and that creates new intersections, because you can see there it's sort of barely touching some other parts of the model. But again, none of that is of particular concern to me. Not that you don't want to have any awareness of what kind of mesh you're about to generate, but you're certainly not involved in polygons or points or any of those things. So there again, I've selected that group so you can see the stuff that we're working on, and again, there's the previous meshing of it when it sat down lower. And I just hit display export mesh. And this takes a while because this is a complex model with some fairly sophisticated Boolean work. But still, it's probably a matter of whatever that was, 10, 12 seconds, I don't know. And there you have it. All of that stuff has been resolved anew. And and it's not just a simple Boolean intersection. That's part of why we call it meta-Booleans. You can see there is smoothing and relaxation in play here. That's creating sophisticated shapes and sophisticated intersections between those solids. So there you have it, and again, there's nothing to inhibit me as an artist from tweaking this even further. So I might look at something like this and go, well, that's fine, that's close, but I missed a couple of things there. And if this were a mesh that had gone through the typical manipulation that mesh construction requires, I probably would say, oh well, good enough. But In this case, I'm more than happy to go back in there, select this group again, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to slide it back a little bit in Z there, and just again change the composition and the balance of the components a bit. Part of what I was after there is there's a little area here right behind the collar of the back of the cockpit where the engine cowling meets the met the collar there, and that was just sort of all filled in and had lost some of its interest. And by sliding that and regenerating the mesh, I now have kind of a nice little bit of a detail and complexity there, and makes it a little more interesting to look at. So now we're going to move on and do some a little bit more substantial work. This is one of the main Boolean clusters in this model. And as you can see, it's quite complex. It involves a number of, in fact, there are 15 elements to this. But when you think about it, 15 is a small number compared to polygons or patches or other things you might be dealing with when trying to construct something like this. You'll notice it's been sliced up in two directions, sort of along the length and across, as well as having some nice, cutouts and for the wings and nice little undercut there on the belly. What I'm going to work with here is a cone that's part of this cluster that was originally left undefined, which meant that it wasn't being trimmed by anything. And I'm going to turn it into a primary object, and now you can see it got cut away. There's just a little bit of it left there, because now it's being trimmed by all the same trim surfaces that are affecting the other primaries, the green objects you see in this display. And there I'm just playing with its shape. I changed its lower radius and I'm lengthening it a bit. And you'll notice I'm doing all of this in real time with two shadow casting lights and fully shaded rendering. When it gets complex, you don't always want to do that. And you see in this inset here what it looks like if you use the quicklime mode instead. It's even more fluid, and it can become critical when you're dealing with larger objects and even more complex Booleans. And we additionally offer a scaling of the input, so as you see there, you can turn a large mouse movement into a very small shift in the object's geometry, which is important because these intersections can be a very subtle thing. So anyway, back to the full-blown over-the-top view here, because I don't know, I sometimes like working this way because it's a true what you see is what you get kind of mode. You're not dealing with a proxy when you're editing. So if you find the speed acceptable with all this stuff turned on, and by the way, just turning off shadows will probably just about double the speed you would see even in this shaded mode. Then work here, and if not, if you really feel that need for speed and fluidity, you can go to the quicklime mode. So again, I've reselected that large cone, that second cone we were editing a moment ago. And I had made the whole thing bigger and it was a little bit too much, so now I'm just changing its length, and it's got kind of a nice effect there where the back end of the cone now sits in front of the wings. And again, much more interesting, varied kind of shape to the fuselage now, as opposed to just a moment ago when I scaled the whole thing, the base of the whole thing up. And I kind of like that, so we'll just go ahead and generate a mesh of that. And again, notice, there's all sorts of new intersections, new topology. It's essentially new morphology here. But there's nothing to stop me from trying that. And if I didn't like it, I could go back or I could alter it again and, find what I'm looking for. Creativity and design should not stop once you start modeling. It's an unnatural thing, in my opinion, in the world of art. The idea that the modeling phase is simply execution, because like any form of art, as you move along, you are informed by the results. You can't necessarily predict through sketches or preliminary models or anything else what really is going to be the best and the ideal or the most aesthetically satisfying arrangement. So, quick recap here. That was the original model. There it was with the solids moved around. That was the original mesh. There's the remesh, all done quickly and painlessly, and ready for more should I want to do it.